Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us in our podcast, Mindful Conversation for Critical Critical Time. I want to welcome you as you join me again to engage in a conversation to address some of the issues that are actually uh, happening and the event that are taking place in our world today. Again, as you recall, I have shared with you this podcast is a conversation dedicated to explore how rampant of discontent, distrust, emotional contentions continue and are drowning the world of humanity into what I consider to be our emotional, social, and psychological crisis. The question I like to ask you today, and I'm sure some of you probably ask yourself this question, but if you haven't, please indulge me and start with this question. How do we end up where we are today? This is a very important question for us to ask. And because of the question, I wanted to entitle this podcast The Turning Point. The turning point is a view that I'm sure you probably heard before, but it coincides with the question we asked before. How did we end up where we are today? And what that means are the events that are taking place in our world today, the event that are taking place in our lives today, the event that are affecting each of us today, the event that are affecting every nation today, the event that are affecting every organization, every institutions, and every culture today. How did we ended up where we are today? This question is fundamental in many respects, but for one of the most point that make it relevant is the fact that you and I know, again today, because of the technological revolutions, which I have shared in previous note, and I label it as the technological revolution and its subsequent industry are creating a wave of rising dent in the world of humanity, creating all sorts of waves and emotional reaction, as well as the open, what some are called opportunity for people to go and indeed take in what they consider to be opportunity to venture out in different areas and using the social platform to convey their thoughts, to share their opinion, and express their beliefs, in many cases, impose their view on the rest of the world. How did we end up where we are today? And so, the way I look at it, for as far as I can tell, if you take on the social media and your responses is to talk about what's going on, whatever the issue is, whether it's political, social, educational, economical, or personal, if that's your view, you probably missing something. You probably missing the turning point. And the reason why I say that is because of the question I asked. How did we end up where we are today? For example, we've been working at getting where we are today for many decades, if it's not hundreds of years. The world, society, mankind, human, men, women, government, institution, organizations, for many, many years have been working very hard to bring us where we are today. And this is why I'm saying that instead of take on this social platform and calling names and given label to groups and organization. I think what we need to do is ask ourselves this question: how did we end up here where we are today? Because if you understand the many years and the many decades it took the world to bring itself to this turning point we are, you will have a different understanding. And so, therefore, your approach, or should I say, your response to the things that are taking place in the world today will not be take on the street and protest. It would not be take on the social platform, the social media, and label name calling. For example, in recent years, the term woke, everybody's talking about woke, but what in the world is that? What is that? There are some, quote, educators who's calling and labeling postmodernist. What in the world is that? It doesn't tell us anything. It's just a terminology, just a term we use. Tell me, what is it that is happening? And the single most important description that will describe what's going on is woke or postmodernist. Tell me, what are the action? What are the thought? What is the tendency? What is the behavior that the only thing that can describe it is the term we use? There are those who are using a term that we call the progressive. What in the world is that? Now, we all understand what those terms imply, but what do they mean? And that's why it's very important for us to ask ourselves, how did we get where we are today? How long the world, nations, regions, people, governments, institutions have been working to bring us where we are today. For example, if you go back in a very recent history at the end of the 20th century, if we want to look at the mid 1980s and all through the 90s, one of the trend that was happening not only in the United States, in Canada, and different parts of the world, but primarily we see in in most of the industrial country, was that there was a rejection to traditional family. I remember here in the United States where I live, there was this open where people, the young adult, male and female, women and men, I want to make sure that's what I'm talking about, were rejecting the traditional family value, where they began to live together outside of marriage. We used to call it cohabitation. Well, there was no response. There was no, upheaval about this. Nobody was making a big deal about it. We just know it was there. It was on TV. If you look at some of those TV shows that was during the 80s and the 90s, there was lots of sexual innuendos. There were lots of relationship that was out of bound with the foundational traditional family. Another part of this was men and women, young adult, will start having children outside of marriage. I was right at the prime of my career as a counselor, and I have clients that I work with, and they were very clear with regard to where they are in their lives and the decision they were making, that they didn't see the need to be married to have children. They didn't see the need to be married to be in a relationship. And society didn't make any fuss about that. It was acceptable. I remember even in the church where I attend and continue to attend, been there for many years, there was a clear distinction about people who were in relationships living together outside of the traditional family. And so the point was, what was that? Well, that was a clear expression and a beginning of the rejection of the traditional family. We know that, and it's still to today, there are many homes here in our society, in the United States, and I'm sure in other part of the world, where the family structure, where the language that we come to be used is what we call the extended family. Extended family is a home where the man who's in the home, he is not the father of the 3, 4 children that is in the home. And the woman is not the mother of the children that is in the home. They are partly. There's a marriage where the man is divorced and the woman is divorced, and she have 2 children and he have 2, or she have 1 or he have 1, and they live together and they look like a family, but it was acceptable. And so these were the steps that was leading us toward some of the things you see that was happening in the world today. And so therefore, these were some of the steps. And if you can go as far back as you possibly can, you will see there were many things that were happening, and those things were happening as precursor, as precipitous, that will bring us where we are today. And so for those experts, for those outspoken individual, for these naysayers who's taken on the social media to raise the voices concerning whatever else, whether it's LGBT, homosexual, transgender, whatever the topic you address and you feel a call to address, I would encourage you to ask yourself that question: how did we end up here today? LGBT, transgender, homosexual was not something that just happened in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. This thing been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it always there in the background, subtly making its way to the 21st century, where now it's in our face and we are forced to deal with it. And so let me be very clear. I am in no way, shape, form, or fashion, in any thought and intention, promote nor encourage any type of violence toward anyone for any reason, regardless of how disagree we are with those views of these people. I will not support any form of violence or any type of confrontation for many reasons. For one thing, it's not a solution. Take on the street, burning, looting, and shouting and screaming and yelling at each other's face definitely is not a way to go about the issues that we're facing today. They're much deeper. They possess within themselves deep mental, emotional, and psychological blueprints within both sides of the aisle. And so therefore, whichever point of view you share, it behooves you. It is your responsibility, therefore, to do the due diligence, do the work, and ask yourself, how did we get where we are today? What were the steps? What were the decisions? What were the reaction many were making? Government is one of the loudest noise maker there is. Government make lots of noise. And for those who don't know how government noise affect its citizen, you are missing the mark. And who is the front line? Who's at the front line of the LGBT, the transgenderism, the mutilation of children, telling our children, who's making those policy? Government, institutions, and organizations. And these government institutions, these organizations, this industry been working very hard at many, many years to bring us to where we are today. And so, therefore, we need to understand that within the core, within the nucleus of what you and I are facing today, in terms of the deterioration of the very fabric of our society, it's been in the work for many years. It has been in the making for many years. And if we're going to have any success in addressing these issues, if we're going to have any success in understanding deeply, fundamentally, psychologically, if we're going to have any success, we have to go at the core of what brings us here today. What is the best way? I'm sure you probably heard this question before. What is the best way of destroying a nation as fast as you possibly can? Targeting the youth, the innocent, the vulnerable, the young people, particularly young women who's more prone to negative emotion, young man who's right at the age of transition from a boyhood to a manhood, very vulnerable. The world is very abstract to them. They're very impressionable. They don't understand the yes and the no and the ups and the down of the very complex world of ours. If you want to destroy a nation, you're targeting the youth. And that's precisely what this idea, whatever you call it, whether you call it the wokeism, the postmodernist, or the progressive, whatever terminology you use, targeting the young people, young adult, and from what we understand, even young children. It's a cry of shame that today we're living in a world, we're living in a society where a government institution, a politician will dare to make a decision at complete disregard of the parent of the children, to tell a child he or she can go right ahead and make decision for his or her life that will be permanent and have very serious mental, emotional, and psychological impact without the consent of the parent. This has been in the making for many, many years. I've been in religion all my life. I was raised in the church. I was raised by the church. I saw that even in the church. There was a time I used to go to church. It was very clear that the family was the center of the congregation. I remember when I began to notice the shift in the congregational structure of the church that I used to attend, and I visited other churches and see the same trend that was happening, where people would start coming in and to the church, and they were boyfriend, girlfriend. They were living together. They were engaged in living together. I remember one church I visited, a couple who have three children came and introduced themselves to me and greeted me and told me it was good to have me here and visiting their church, and introduced each other to me. That was his fiancée and that was her fiancé. They've been living together for 5 years. They've been engaged for 3 years. And the church wasn't doing anything about that. Right then and there, you see, there was a shift in what the religious organization, of what the religious institution was allowed to happen, was tolerate, which was step toward where we were going to be today. And today, here's the church, here is the organization, here's the religious institution facing a dilemma, don't know what to do with those who profess to be Christian, and clearly the behavior, the tendency, the action does not fit in line with the Holy Scripture. But the church failed to realize the beginning process when we begin to allow one thing to happen, and another, and then here we are today. And so the question goes back to us once more. How did we end up where we are today? And so my argument with anyone who's using the social media to address whatever it is you feel that you have a need to address, do the due diligence, do your homework, begin with a foundation. How did we end up here today? And what are the measures we need to take that will enable us to have a greater success in addressing this issue? Because as you and I know very well, it's not just an issues, it's not just reaction, it's not just tendencies, it's not just behavior. You and I know very well that every reaction we take, in some cases, will have years of impact, not only on our lives, but on the lives of those who will come, the next generation that will come. And you and I should understand that very clear, because there are many things you and I are dealing with in our lives that we inherited from the previous generation. For those who keep silence and not raise a voice in addressing and bring to awareness the things that were happening. And so it's not just reaction and actions and tendency and behavior. It's the long-term impact that this current generation will have on the next generation. In conversation with some of my clients who said, what do we do? How do we address this issue? How do we go about understanding each other? I made it very clear to them. This is not about misunderstanding. This is not about, let me sit down and have a conversation with you and we can arrive at and get to a point of understanding each other. The issues of the day, this is what I call it. I call our podcast Mindful Conversation for Critical Time. Okay? It's a mindful conversation for critical time. This is critical because this is not about any one of us going to sit down with anyone and trying to come to some kind of understanding. And this is very important to know. And I want to encourage some of my colleagues and anyone out there who's take on the platform to address some of the social, political, and educational, and even family issues that are facing our world today. I would encourage you to stop removing some of the label that we've been inherited from those institutions. In other words, if you look at yourself and then call yourself the right or the left, those are deceiving concepts. You neither right or no left. Those are people with deep beliefs. We need to call those things what they are. It's neither left nor right. Now, we know what those terms imply, but we need to stop referring or the left this and the right this. The world is neither postmodernist or progressive. It's neither woke. What we have is human being, man and woman, making decisions that are affecting each other. And so we need to understand this is not a situation where we or any one of us will sit down and have a conversation with someone who have a complete different view about existence, about life, about the world, that we're going to come to some kind of understanding. It must be very clear that this is about the survivability of humanity. In other words, if we were to sit down to have a conversation with anyone, which I'm more willing to do, we have to have a ground rule. We have to have a compass. We have to have an objective that will guide our conversation, that will guide a conversation that you'll have with someone. What is the purpose? What would be the purpose of having this conversation with that someone or with a group? I do public speaking. What's the purpose of having a open discourse and have an open conversation? We need to be very clear that whatever ideological view someone holds, is that ideological view in its form and all of its aspect, will it enhance the overall well-being of humanity? That is very important for us to address. If you have any beliefs today, if you hold on to any type of political, religious, philosophical beliefs today, the question needs to be very clear. Is that belief in all of its aspect, not part and parcel, not some of it, and all of itself, if you put this belief forward, if the world allow you to proceed in behaving and conducting yourself in such manner, will this ideological belief, will it enhance the overall well-being of mankind? And we need to look at the enhancing the overall well-being of mankind in many different facets, not just in one, and so on. No, we need to take this ideological belief, whatever it is you believe, and you believe you're entitled to have it. If we're going to have a conversation with it, we will need to take it and measure it and put it in a juxtapose and extrapolate and come to clearly understand, will this ideological belief you have, will it, in all of its aspects, enhance the overall well-being of humanity? And if we have clear evidence that the answer is no, we must oppose that ideological belief at any cost. Now, not everyone is prepared to face the daunting fact that will cost, that will have some emotional, it would have some financial cost. It would have, yes, it's not going to be free. But if you believe that these ideological view, these pseudoscientific ideas that are propagated the world today, should these ideological beliefs continue to flourish, if they continue to grow, they will, in effect, become the catalyst to which brought our humanity to its utter destruction. You and I must oppose these ideological views at any cost. And there lie the fundamental issues of the day. Are you willing? I'm not talking about simply take on the social media and make a bunch of noise. I don't want to become a noise maker. I don't want to talk about issue. I want to address them in all of their fundamental aspects and make it very clear. See, you must be willing to say no in all of the ways. And so wherever you're addressing those issues, you better have a plan. Are you willing to live on the minimalist concept? Are you willing to say no to banks who's promoting those ideas, that you will not deal with those banks? Are you willing to say no to any organization that you associate with? No, I will not associate with that organization if you're promoting those ideological views. Are you willing to say no to any institution that promoting these false pseudoscience? Are you willing to say no to them? It might cost you. And so therefore, this is the idea of doing the balancing act to make sure that you mentally, emotionally, and psychologically prepared to address the issue of the day, because we do know in every era of humanity was always get this turning point. We recall, if we look quickly back into history, those who lived during the Dark Ages, during the medieval era, probably thought, will this era ever end? And we do know what happened. The Middle Era came, the Renaissance that lead to the Enlightenment years. Okay, every era shift itself. And the question is very clear. While we embellish some great ideological view from the Renaissance and from what we call the Enlightenment years, because that changes the world. Is the world a better place because of this event that happens? And so we can take those era in our history and juxtapose them to what we are facing today. Should we allow these ideological view to flourish? Should we allow those pseudoscientists to continue to abandon, logical and fundamental view? Should we allow them to flourish? Will this make the human world a better world? And we better be clear on the aspect of how we proceed, because any feelings, any view, any clear evidence base that these ideas in and of themselves, should they continue, will be detrimental to humanity, we must oppose them at every cost. And so, my friends, or whoever you are, I welcome you. I support those of you who's raising a voice for logic and reason and high standard of ethical living. I am with you on this. But please, do your work. Prepare your family. Prepare your friends. Prepare your children. The fight for humanity is just begun. And as I share with you, the Mindful Conversation for Critical Time, it is a podcast, conversation dedicated to explore how rampant discontent, emotional contentions, and psychological distrust are bringing the world of humanity to its utter destruction. Unless you and I and many others take a stand on the side of truth. Truth, not ideological, not pseudoscience, truth. The unequivocal, unquestionable, natural truth. And say, do your work. I am with you. I'm willing to stand by your side for you also to raise the voice and raise our awareness to speak truth to power. And it's a pleasure to share some thought with you. Until the next time, listen. I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you haven't subscribed, do so to stay tuned with our future conversation. Again, this podcast is a production of Insuch Innovation. Once again, thank you for listening.